Back in 1967, I was a trooper in a light armoured reconnaissance unit. Seems a long time ago now. We had Fox and Ferret and armoured cars, so on and so forth. I was a humble trooper. And I never dreamed for one moment, as a very keen military historian, all my life, even as a schoolboy, I was nerdy on military history, that we would ever be involved again in a conflict in Afghanistan. It seemed to me to be inconceivable, given the British Army's history in Afghanistan and the northwest frontier. The first Afghan war, as it's known, in the early 1840s, was an absolute disaster. The army was beaten, it trailed back, there were virtually no survivors under Lord Elphinstone, a total and utter disaster. The following year, Lord Roberts went back, fight Bobs, a very good general indeed. It was a punitive raid to give them a bit of a spanking, which he did, and it didn't do any good because the trouble is you can't hold ground in Afghanistan. It's a huge, barren, Stone Age sort of place, you know. It's got mud villages and mountains, and it's just so difficult. The access is so difficult, and it's a difficult place to actually win and hold. You can win a battle here and there, but you can't hold the territory, and that's the problem, and that's where we've gone wrong. And we had the second Afghan war in the 1870s, and that was also to no avail for the same reason. We've had 3 Afghan wars, the British Army, and I even, would you believe, served later on in my career with a soldier who had a Northwest Frontier Medal 38. So it's been going on for generations, this problem of Afghanistan. And it really doesn't take a military geeky history chap like me to actually know that. It's unwinnable. And we know that also when you think of the Soviets, who went in 1978 with unbelievable force, with a much shorter chain of command and a much shorter supply line, so on and so forth. This was actually astonishing that also that the Russians were beaten. For the simple reason it's a no-win. It's a no-win situation out there, I'm afraid, in Afghanistan. And I very disappointed about these matters, and I knew this at the beginning. I went out on attachment to the Royal Air Force Regiment in 2012, I think it was, and had first-hand experience of seeing it on the ground. And I knew then that it didn't matter how many history books you read, it was unwinnable, and it could only end one way, and it is ending that way now, shamefully. But we should never have been involved in the first place. Now, this has turned from an American invasion into a NATO operation. But let's remember, NATO was designed, and I was a member of NATO forces, it was totally designed to protect against the Soviet Union the threat from Eastern Europe, North Atlantic Treaty Organization. It has no business in Afghanistan, especially in an unwinnable situation. And when I'd been out there, I was being approached by BBC producers to actually come on air and explain, as I'd explained to producers, why this war was unwinnable and it could only end in tears. I refused to do this because there were people serving out there, people I knew. My old regiment was out there, next amalgamation, the Mercians. They were being knocked over in big numbers. And the last thing that the wives and daughters and brothers and sisters and parents wanted to hear were their young ones out there fighting and dying, that this was in a terrible cause and it was a no-win situation. And any fool could see that. And I wouldn't come on and say that it wasn't fair on the families, but I'm saying it now. It was unwinnable, and it's shameful that we should have been sucked into it. With all those futile young deaths. It really is. And I'm worried that we clatter around the world, trailing after the United States, who seem to crash around the world with massive resources, massive forces, all on borrowed money, incidentally. It doesn't matter whether it's Libya, the Horn of Africa, Afghanistan, Iraq. It doesn't matter where it is. The whole thing is being driven by the military-industrial complex. It's about money. And the original idea that somehow it was going to do something to stop a base camp for terrorism is absurd. If you've got to look at the geopolitical strategy of Afghanistan, it's in the middle of absolutely nowhere. It's barely out of the Stone Age. That wasn't the problem. That is just ridiculous, that it could be a base for international terrorism. And if you want a problem with terrorism, to look at the terrorism problem, you'll find that in the ghettos of the big cities, because the disruption that all this has caused in the Middle East and the Indian subcontinent mean that we have refugees here who are radicalised. That's the problem that we have here, not over there. And it's a tragedy that I met some really charming people in Afghanistan and at my course at the Royal College of Defence Studies, where my thesis was actually on war aims. What was the war aim in Afghanistan? It's cost billions and billions of dollars, lots and lots of lives and maimings of young men. What was the war aim about this? Or is it just to question Libya, the Horn of Africa, the Middle East, the Indian subcontinent? Is it because there's $1 trillion annual budget for the industrial military complex, which Eisenhower warned us? He warned us of this. You have to create an enemy if you're going to maintain those kind of budgets. Now, I've also noticed there's some personable, articulate parliamentarians who served at regimental level, very nice fellows, being interviewed about this, who don't have a clue about strategy. They're being interviewed by the BBC and people like this. Because they were once in the army. That's not good enough. Just being a junior regimental officer was a very noble thing indeed, but that isn't about geopolitical strategy and great military strategy. We've lost. We have to go. What we have to do is make sure that those people, those friends of ours, are looked after. They'll have to be got out. I'm talking about interpreters, army officers and their families as best we can. But this is Vietnam all over again. You know, I was a young man when I watched this happen in Saigon, the last rush to get to the helicopters. It seems that we never learn anything from this. War after war, futile war after futile war. War is a bad thing. It's expensive. It costs lives. Let's try and stop war. Our forces, our Air Force, I'm not a pacifist, our Navy is for protecting our island. It's for protecting the United Kingdom. It's not a crash all over the world, poking its nose in to no avail in futile endeavour. I would actually get hold of whoever was responsible for this, those people who actually put us into this, has allowed this to go on. I'd put them on trial. I'd put them on trial for this. I'd want to know exactly how this happened, why this has happened, and let's see if we can stop this happening again. It really won't do. I want some apologies. I want some reasons. It's just got to stop. Where's it next going to be? Please, I beg the neocons and the idiots in Washington and the idiots in Whitehall who follow their trail, it seems unquestioningly, to sort all this out once and for all. As most of you know, my work is very heavily independently research-based, and I get my information from all over the world. It would help if you press the subscribe button and the little bell next to it, because the more subscribers I have, the more likely it is that international independent research institutes will share their material with me. It's most helpful, and then of course I'll automatically share it with you. So, surprise, won't cost you anything. Thank you very much.